how many of you ever got paid for grades, or once you did a certain number of these things, you got ice cream, you got this, that, or at school you got stickers working up towards getting something? Yes. Well, she doesn't like that. At first she sounded a lot like Alfie to me, and I was like, because I don't really like Alfie, but unlike Alfie, she gives a few more actual helpful, I don't like this, but I think it's because you should do it this way, which, if you're going to dog on those things that have worked for a long time, at least you can come up with some helpful alternatives. So I had Barbara Coloroso, and just a little background. As dear Dr. Verlo would say, she wears many hats, except that on different sites I was on, it said that she was a consultant for schools and medical communities and the criminal justice system. I never really found out what she does with them, but I mean, she apparently does a ton of stuff. A lot of her stuff was aimed towards parenting, but one particular theory has been adapted to work for classroom management. What she's really known for right now, I think, is she has all this stuff on bullying. But what we're going to talk about is her theory of interdiscipline, because that's really what most applies to classroom management from her. One of the sites defined interdiscipline as the ability to behave creatively, constructively, cooperatively, and responsibly without being directed by someone else. What I really took away from all the reading was that it's about building in students their own ability to regulate their behavior, because when they're out of school, they're not getting grounded for their bad behavior, they're not getting their stickers, to motivate them to behave. They need to have gotten through school learning to, I shouldn't do that because this, I'm not going to do that. And being able to regulate themselves is going to make them be able to work cooperatively and constructively, and they're going to be creative in the ways that they're going to achieve what they want without acting out or what have you. So that's really what she thinks it's our responsibility to build that, because that's really what's going to benefit them in the long run. And she said that for teachers to be able to teach students this interdiscipline, to build it in them, they have to come from 3 philosophical stances. Without this, if you don't believe this, then you're not going to be able to teach interdiscipline. And the first one is that all children are worth the effort and time that it takes to teach interdiscipline. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. And that teachers must interact with children using the golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated, because this preserves their dignity, and it really preserves your classroom climate. And then students must learn to take ownership of their own problems, and that's where we're talking. They can take ownership of their problems, they'll actually be involved in solving their own problems, which is what's teaching interdiscipline. And so she also talks about 3 categories of teachers. And she says there are 3 categories, pretty much everybody's going to fall into one of these 3 categories, but only one of these 3 categories is really what you're wanting to aim for, because only one of them can teach interdiscipline. And just from the names, the brick wall teacher, the jellyfish teacher, and the backbone teacher, which one do you think is the one that she thinks is going to be the best? The backbone, right. It's got the most positive connotation there. But it's important to talk about the other 3, because it's really easy when you're having a rough day, kids aren't behaving, to either slip into the brick wall or the jellyfish, because that's just going to be our natural reaction. We just have to watch ourselves and make sure that we're always displaying the backbone teacher characteristics. So the brick wall teacher, it says, enforces rules strictly, uses humiliation and rewards, does not believe in interdiscipline, relies on competition, relies on rote learning, and then tries to break students' wills. And I mean, I know I've had teachers like that, and they can seem to have really great classroom management because everybody's quiet, everybody's doing what they're supposed to, but when they're away from that teacher, they're not necessarily exhibiting those behaviors. Everybody's like, wow, he's good in your class, he's awful at home. There's a lot of times that's kind of the connection there. Then you have the jellyfish teacher who has no set rules or structures. They're inconsistent with classroom management. They don't see a need to teach interdiscipline, or they're afraid that in trying to, it's not going to work, and they don't really want to experience that failure, so they're not going to try. They use put-downs, threats, or bribes, or a combination thereof, and they allow the emotions of the students to rule, and honestly, sometimes their emotions. Finally, we have the backbone teacher, which is what we all want to aspire to. It says they have simple but clearly defined rules. They use natural and reasonable consequences, and we'll talk specifically later about what it means to use natural and reasonable consequences. They motivate students to achieve their potential. They help students to realize their true selves, their own abilities, their potential, and then they help students learn interdiscipline. So we're going to watch this clip, and then I'm going to ask you to kind of see which teaching type you think she is, and we're going to discuss a little bit why you think that. If it will work, which I hope it will. Oh dear, where's the sound? I don't know, hold on.
Help, Dylan, get up there.
Yes, fix it.
Oh,
down.
Oh, fix this.
There we go.
Now we're ready to go. Hold your ears, Captain.
Difficulty if your life depended on it. She tired with a comb. Please, what color will that be? Mrs. D, Mrs. I, Mrs. F, F, I, Mrs. D, Mrs. U, Mrs. L, T, Y. Why are all these women married? Mrs. D, Mrs. I are supposed to be teaching spelling.
Alright, oops. Again. Okay, so mostly I played that because I love Matilda, but it has some practical applications here. So what is the principal? Is she, what kind of teacher? She's a brick wall, and you can see that in, okay, when she smacks the desk with the Riley crop, everybody straightforward, hands perfect, everybody's facing forward, everybody knows what to do. She has great control of the classroom. They're all terrified of her, but she has great control. But again, when they leave that classroom, if she's not there, her presence is the only thing that's managing their behavior. They're not managing their own behavior. It's her presence. They know, they have self-preservation instincts. They know when she's in the room, they have to act a certain way. But when she's gone, she hasn't necessarily built any discipline in them. They're not regulating themselves. So that's important. And you can actually kind of see in this video a little bit of a backbone teacher in Miss Honey, even though she's not doing any teaching. The fact that the student who stands up is like, you know, she taught us how to spell a long word yesterday. That's even evidence there that she believes that they can learn long words. Because, I mean, the principal was just totally like, you're, you know, a first grader, you can't do that. But, you know, she's instilled in them that confidence and is actually trying creative ways of helping them learn. So you can kind of see where she's coming from there, too. All right, for actually learning how to teach interdiscipline, we know what kind of a teacher we need to be, but now we need to know actual helpful ways to do that. So there are two methods that she talks about. She talks about assertive confrontation and then natural and reasonable consequences. Assertive confrontation is just really how you need to deal with misbehavior in your classroom. And so she has a 7-step process to it. So saying when confrontation is necessary, use assertive, not an angry or a passive tone. If you use an angry tone, the student is automatically on the defensive, and you're going to end up bickering back and forth with them, and it is not going to go well. And then a passive tone, they're going to think, you're not really serious, what I did was fine, and they're really not going to take you seriously. So you need to be just flat out stern. It says to tell the other person about your feelings. So basically, why does it matter that they're doing what they're doing? How does that make the teacher feel and such? State your belief, but avoid aggressive words. You know, you always do this. You want to avoid those aggressive words because, again, you don't want them going on the defensive. You don't want it to be a bickering match. You want to tell the person the problem and how you feel about it, which is kind of a repetition of step 2. But you need to explain what you want from the other person. You need to listen to the other person's perspective, and then you need to negotiate an agreement. And the reason why it's not just you know, go move your clip is she wants you to go through this process because you're modeling, you know, what you would go through with yourself. You know, you're modeling it, so you're teaching it, and you're teaching it by modeling it, which is why you go through what seems like a long process for it. Then natural and reasonable consequences are her other thing. So what happens when, you know, students do misbehave? What natural consequences are, they occur naturally in response to the person's actions. So one of the most common examples I hear for this is you have a kid, for whatever reason, I don't know what it is about kids, but a lot of times they either want to refuse to put their shoes on to go somewhere or they want to refuse to put their coat on. They want to refuse to do something just because they want to see what happens. And, you know, a lot of parents get trapped in the put your coat on, put your coat on, put your coat on, try spanking, try whatever, just to put a coat on. And what a natural consequence is, you don't want to put your coat on? Okay, go outside, let's go. And what are they going to be when they get outside? They're going to be cold. And they're going to realize, wow, that was a really dumb choice because now I'm really cold. And so that's just like, when there are situations where, you know, they can just do what they're trying to do and they're going to receive consequences in the natural, it's just going to occur, then you should let them do that. Now, of course, there are a lot of situations where, such as running into the street when you're on a field trip or something, you can't let that be a natural consequence because they could seriously be injured. So you have to be very careful when trying to employ natural consequences. And in the instance where a natural consequence is not available or it's too dangerous, then you want to use something she calls reasonable consequences. Basically, reasonable consequences are supposed to teach rather than punish, and they're more directly related to what they did. Whereas she doesn't like grounding because she feels like that's far too separate from whatever the discipline, whatever misbehavior was. There's not a good enough connection to really teach. So an example would be, so you have a student who's like running around the room, not using safe hands and safe feet, and they run into the desk and they knock a picture frame over, okay, and now there's glass. You cannot have them pick up the glass because that's a safety issue, but what you can do is make them stand there with the trash bag or the trash can while you sweep up the glass and put it away. They have to have a hand in cleaning up the mess that they made, but it has to be in a safe manner. So that's what reasonable consequences are. Okay, so for application, I have some management don'ts and some management do's. So the management don'ts. She doesn't think you should punish the student using isolation, shaming, brute force because it invites conflict, creates anger and resentment, and it's adult-centered. You know, you may feel better because you've punished the student and now you have control of your classroom, but she doesn't think you've still really taught them anything. You haven't taught interdiscipline to them, and they're going to be mad at you, and it's just really not going to create the best environment. Don't use rewards or bribes. I have a slightly different opinion on this, but she has made a good point, and a lot of people make it when you're talking about trying to use positive reinforcement. She thinks that it teaches the student to ask, what's in it for me? And a lot of times when it's employed, that is what it does, but if you're going to use them, they need to be employed correctly. But that's not what she thinks. She thinks you shouldn't use them at all. And then don't use destructive words such as like, why can't you be more like your classmates? Because that's just going to tear them down, and it's really not going to make them receptive to what you're trying to teach. So management do's. She wants you to use discipline, and that means like showing students what they should have done as opposed to what they did. Keeping their dignity intact, always still speaking to them with respect. Giving them ownership over the problem, and then giving them options for solving the problem. And it's really good to start giving them options because that helps them start thinking through the process of what are my options to solve my problem, which helps build in them their own creative ability to problem solve. Use appreciation rather than praise. So she's saying instead of saying, you're so smart, you got an A, you would say, thank you for your hard work. And then using natural and reasonable consequences, as we said. Okay, so we're going to do an activity really quick, and I'm going to have U3 be group 1, U4 be group 2, and then U4 be group 3. So here's the scenario. Jessica has been getting into a great deal of trouble at school lately. She is always out of her seat, attempts to boss the other students around, and when the teacher tells her to return to her seat, she tends to talk back before complying for a short time. Group 1, you're going to be brick wall teachers, and when you're going to have about 2 minutes to discuss it, and then we're going to share out what a brick wall teacher would do about this scenario. Group 2, you're jellyfish, so you can figure out what or nothing that the jellyfish teacher would do. And then group 3, you're going to be backbone teacher, so figure out how you would handle Jessica. So just discuss among yourselves for about 2 minutes, and then we'll come back and share.
Whatever. That's pretty natural. I like that.
Natural question to say. Come. Are you out of your sleep yet?
So 4 plus 5 is...
Virtual in like every classroom. That's something you could bring up.
No, you guys come. And have them put it on to do it over.
Yeah.
So is everybody pretty much done?
No.
Alright, well then we can go ahead and come back together. So
We
we
can
can,
address it in the class, but
I think one group is still working.
We're the good.
I America.
It's probably just being really aggressive and like, you know, not giving them any opportunity to like defend themselves, not that, but or like immediate detention, stuff like that.
And like when should we start arguing, being like, you don't argue with me, this is how it is, laying down the law, but not in a kind way.
Right. Because they use humiliation.
Right.
Yep. Okay. All right. Group 2, jellyfish. How did you handle Jessica? Or did you handle Jessica?
Kara embodied it super well.
We did a lot of sighing and eye rolling. A lot of Jessica. I gotta go see them.
That was the problem with this group. Okay. Background. What did you decide?
The first thing we said, it's kind of like a universal rule that in every classroom is respect like the classroom and the people that are in it. So you want to make sure that's clearly stated and make sure it's clearly spoken to her when you're having a discussion. Like, this is the rule you broke. These are the consequences that follow.
Okay.
Thomas had a fun
Yeah,
suggestion.
We said, oh, yeah, so that one. Well, Prof. Horn mentioned one time that, or Dr. Horn, that like, for some students, they're gonna, if they pick on students who are bossy one of these days, they're gonna pick the wrong student to be bossy to, and they're gonna get punched in the face. And so, you don't wanna like make it happen. I mean,
Right.
it's gonna be a natural cause. I mean, if they keep it up. So you may wanna. I mean, you can always talk about that. I think that what they were saying was really right. In the middle of class, you would probably want to say something like that, and maybe I don't know, give attention, whatever your methods are, but